believe we're, I think, fantastic. If we're not live, then
Please tell us.
yeah. Well, they won't be able to tell us, Sheikh Sohail. So,
Oh,
if we're not live, we'll just be speaking to each other and have a wonderful conversation,
Alhamdulillah.
inshallah. But if we are live, then please, let us know. Welcome, everyone. What I'll do in this session is a little bit different from your usual zakat calculation webinar, which we will have as well later on next Wednesday, inshallah, with Mufti Faraz. But this one, we want to get a little bit more, philosophical to some extent, but also just to understand, what zakat actually is. It's not just a simple calculation that you do and that's it. It has a lot more meaning around it. So we'll be going into a number of themes around that. So, thinking about how, zakat has a role to play. Like, what does the Sharia actually want from us when it's asking for zakat? Does zakat have a impact on inequality in society? And does how does zakat help lubricate the economy, if at all? And so many other related themes like that. We'll be going into the recipients of zakat as well, which is always a incendiary topic, which I'm sure Sheikh Sohail, the diplomat, will navigate very, very ably. But before we start, let me introduce Dr. Sohail. So Sheikh Sohail is one of the foremost authorities, I think, in zakat globally today. And you've I was looking through your LinkedIn, Sheikh Sohail, and I noticed that you actually studied at Imperial uh,
Mhm.
in the late 1990s, and then there's a gap of about 10 or so years, and then you reemerge at SOAS, and you did a master's there, and then you
In
did a
Oxford.
PhD, then you did a PhD at Oxford, and then you were at Cambridge Muslim College for a number of years, and now you're at NZF. So what was this? What was happening in that early noughties kind of decade?
It was the quest, is what was happening. What happened was, before I went to university, this is 1996, which is the summer before my degree started, I went on a 1 month intensive Islamic studies program. And with people like Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, who was, quite on fire in the 90s, if people know the story. And so, as a young man, very impressionable, I just had this interest to learn my religion, learn Arabic, go overseas, all of that stuff. And obviously, my dad said, well, "What are you talking about? Just finish your degree, shut up and carry on." And so
What degree were you doing?
I was doing information systems and engineering. Didn't really learn how to program. I had a very good friend who helped me. So shout out to Altaf, who really took me under his wing. And so after this degree, circumstances so aligned that I was able to go overseas. And so actually, it was actually 10 years. Actually, if you look at the full gap, I actually think it was 13 years between the end of my degree, which is 2000, and the start of the master's, which is 2013. I spent a year in England. I had a number of health issues, actually. So I spent a year in England where I was memorizing Quran. And then I spent 12 years in Jordan studying and teaching Arabic and Islamic studies.
And so you memorized the Quran in 1 year.
Well, I didn't know you'd get so ask me such difficult questions so early on, because I don't know the right way to answer that. So I made up a plan and I moved very quickly in it. So I did finish, but I didn't fully consolidate. It was a very quick plan. Then I traveled overseas. So I feel like I'm still trying to consolidate. So in one sense, it's been a 20-year plan,
Yeah, yeah.
but there was a 1 year sprint in that time.
Sheikh Sohail, this is not the Graham Norton show. We're gonna. I'll ask as what I find interesting. Hopefully, the audience finds it interesting as well. So that's really fascinating. So you basically immerse yourself for 13 years, studying Islamic law, and then I guess you did it from the more academic route as well. I wanted to ask you, how, before we dive into it properly, what do you think is the difference between the relationship that we have to zakat in the West or in the UK versus the relationship that you saw of people in your travels, if anything?
That is a very, 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 very good question. I'll have to think about it. Um, I'd say it's very similar. The only thing I would say that's obviously different is that localizing zakat seems quite obvious when you're living in Jordan, for example. So this summer, I met a number of charity heads, one what you might call a non-governmental charity, one is a governmental charity, both distributing zakat. I asked about their policies, their procedures, their processes, but everything was local and Jordanian. There's enough poverty that that's what the main thing is. You're helping people locally. That's certainly what I saw. I asked a little bit about my relatives, I think, when I was in Pakistan recently. So I've never thought about it, by the way. It's a very good question. My suspicion is localizing zakat is quite a common thing in
Yeah,
much of the Muslim world because inequality, which I think we're going to talk about, is quite an obvious feature. And the sense of social responsibility, I think, is quite obvious. We're a diaspora community, I think, so identity is something we're coming to terms with, where in those countries that is less of an issue, is what it appears to me.
makes sense. And Sheikh Suhail, diving in then on the back of that, zakat is obviously one of the five pillars of Islam. We give it every lunar year, 2.5% on our cash or liquid assets that are sitting, and um, and we give it as a calculation. But is there a relationship between zakat and tackling economic inequalities over the long term?
Yeah, I was going to critique your question, but as you've got me thinking now, as we've started this conversation, I feel like saying yes, but it depends on what you mean by the word solution. When we talk about solutions to inequality, we assume that the solution will be a movement towards equality. And equality is something, it's not something that sacred law speaks of, as far as I've seen in any chapter, that equality is an ideal, or being rich is a problem, or being rich means why do you have more than? There's nothing of that sort in the sacred law for reasons we can explore. But what there is in the sacred law extensively is a notion of what you could call social responsibility, wealth coming with a burden. And zakat is the most foundational level of that burden, but there's other burdens as well in wealth. And so if zakat is a solution to inequality, it's not by moving towards equality, but
Mm,
it's by laying down in the psyche and the psychology of that economy the idea of responsibility of being wealthy. And if the wealthy feel genuinely responsible for those in need to help them out, which is not the same as moving towards equality, that is a solution to, because when we talk about economic inequality, we're talking about other kinds of inequality as well. Social inequality, not full access to services, etc. But if the psyche is one of responsibility, community, solidarity, care, you're not doing them a favor, you owe it to them. They're doing you a favor by accepting your charities. Do you know the
mm,
money is not all yours, etc., etc. What you do that, you set a framework of another kind of being in society. That kind of being is a solution, because the inequality itself is something Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says is part of his plan again and again and again and again and again in the Holy Quran. أَوْلَمْ يَرَوْا أَنَّ اللَّهَ يَبْسُطُ الرِّزْقَ لِمَنْ يَشَاءُ إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَآيَاتٍ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala expands and he contracts.
mm,
And then he explains, فَآتِ ذَا الْقُرْبَ حَقَّهُ الْمِسْكِينَ وَابْنَ السَّبِيلِ. And Allah says, I've done all of this for you to reflect, and so therefore give the right to those who have a need. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's his plan. Rizq is not something we apportion. And his plan is I call it disparity in gifts, disparity in wealth. And those who have more have now got to give rights, and as they give rights, society is formed. It's part of the social tie that people are tied through care. So I'll say it's a solution, but not towards equality, but towards solidarity, community, responsibility, and a sense of oneness. And it starts an imagination to what we can call an economy of charity, which we can also explore.
Really, really fascinating. So the title should actually be Zakat, the solution to um, possibly not economic inequality, but maybe extreme economic inequality, or something like that, where well, I guess I guess it's too long for a title, but the point is the point is that if there are people in your society that are like really desperate, in a kind of desperate need, that is a bit of a problem. And for us to have for us having being affluent or having more wealth, the zakat actually targets us, as opposed to trying to solve the problem directly. It's kind of indirectly solving the problem, saying
Mhm.
those who have it, you need to make sure that you're giving it away.
And that's where I think if we, at some point go into the rules of zakat, what's really fascinating about zakat is that the rules are designed to be as non-invasive, non-threatening as possible to people who have wealth. It's only a particular kind. It's only a little bit of. There's no reason why you shouldn't want to do it. And the reason why it's like that is that if there's no reason to not do it, and there's this moral, if you want to call it, imagination being created about this responsibility in wealth, then everybody gives. There's no reason not to give. If there's sufficient education, everybody gives. And if everybody gives, then it's a lot of money. It is a major movement of money, even in today's world. Some people estimate it upwards, the higher estimate is towards $1 trillion of money is moving every year in zakat. So it's a major movement, and it's not threatening, and it can make a huge difference.
Um, and uh, and Sheikh Suhail, this discussion around, um, you know, what does Islam actually want from us when it says, "All right, guys, give zakat"? Like, what's the point?
Yeah,
This is
so we
getting
can
more
tackle this at so
frustrating.
many levels, man. So I'll start a bit, and then you also please uh, jump in as well. So at one level, it's exactly what we're saying. It's hitting in us within our psyche that being rich is a responsibility. Having has burdens in it. You don't have gifts without, with great power comes great responsibility. Is one of those things. Wealth has responsibility in it, and it's teaching us that, which on the theological level, that the money is not yours. Who are you to determine that this is all yours? The one who provided to you is telling you it's not all yours. And therefore, if you don't get it out, your wealth is filthy, impure, polluted, because it's not your money right now. So that lesson is extremely important. The burden of gifts and the fact you own on trust from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's one level. The other level is, I'll say in basic, for now, we can explore later in detail, is responsibility to the needy. And that's something that predates the rules of zakat by, you could say, 13, 15 years in the history of the revelation. If the zakat as rules is revealed in the second or so year after the hijrah, well, most of the half of the Quran at least has been revealed already. And that half has a lot to say about duty of care to the downtrodden. The Quran in Mecca is so explicit. Why are you in hell? Oh, he didn't believe in Allah. He didn't urge people to feed the needy. Surah Haqqa. Other people, why are you in hell? Oh, we didn't used to play. We didn't feed the hungry. So the Quran, right in the beginning, is telling people it's already an economic challenge of an idea of the economy, right before there's any rules or a thing called zakat. There's rights in wealth, and if you don't see to those rights, you will be asked. Separate from your shirk, this is a problem, and you have a duty of care. So this idea of duty of care, responsibility to the needy, Quranic phraseology in Mecca, ta'amul miskin, uh, uh, um, وَلَا يَحُضُّ عَلَى طَعَامِ الْمِسْكِينِ, Surah Al-Haqqa. Why is the guy in trouble? He didn't urge, not feeding of the poor. Literal Arabic is the food of the poor, meaning this food in your fridge belongs to the hungry in your neighborhood. If you have surplus and they're hungry and they have no one but you, how are you denying them their food in your fridge? So the whole language is already setting the scene of another kind of economic imagination, all of the Meccan Quran. And so zakat is just instilling us that we have a duty of care. Then we add what I'm going to call the Medinan element. And the Medinan element, in brief, for us to explore, is the element of what I'm going to simply call faith community. Because when you look at the mapping of an Islamic civilization in a fiqh book, how do they picture the world? When the Muslims go to Iraq or Iran in the time of Sayyidina Umar, how do they imagine a relationship with the world? The way they imagine, and explicitly by the orders of Umar, may Allah be pleased with him, is that the Muslims are in communities governed by the Sharia. The Zoroastrians are in communities governed by their law. The Jews are in communities governed by their law. And then this whole set of faith communities are in a sort of harmony and safety. And so zakat in this vision is the tie of solidarity between the faith community of the Prophet ﷺ. So zakat is instilling now, the money is not yours, you need to purify it. You have a duty of care to those in need as a fundamental part of your economic being, with and without zakat actually. And then finally, this community of faith is family. And when you belong to a family, إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ إِخْوَةٌ, that this is a brotherhood, it's a real family. You have to be doubly ashamed if your blood brother is hungry, and to be triply ashamed if it's your blood brother who also believes in Allah and His Messenger. So what it's creating now is a sense of faith in community. And faith in community for me is at the heart of the Medinan mission, because it's in community that faith is preserved, strengthened, and passed on. So 3 basic ideas, and we can explore more. But what would you add to this, if I can ask you a return question?
So when you were talking, I was thinking around, obviously the modern nation state is very different to what Umar Radhan was setting up for. And so, is the implication, especially if it's a secular state, so is the implication, I was thinking around, like, tax and how that has a role to play. Like, are we to, be controversial? Are we saying that actually perhaps, zakat is the essence of zakat is to take care of the needy in a community, and so that's effectively what the secular state would, put on us as a tax to, provide social security benefits.
The only thing we have to add is this last element, which is the faith element. Because the message of zakat is that Muslims must be driven by the sacred law to exist as ummah. So this unit of ummah is right at the heart of this, what I'm going to call this prophetic civilizational view. Because you are strengthened through the brotherhood. You feel a genuine tie of belonging to the brotherhood. And it's through this brotherhood stroke sisterhood of Iman that faith is preserved. There's no doubt about it. What is the best thing we can offer the next generation of believers? It is communal institutions. Muslim Scouts, who you and I, had a really fun time with just a month or so ago. There's various forms of mosques and football clubs, and that's the best thing we can ever offer them. It's faith in community. That's how you preserve it. And so this da'wah to preserve Iman, to give people a sense of pride that when they go to bed at night, I'm really happy I'm a Muslim because we look out for each other. It's the widest possible net, because not everyone's going to learn Arabic. Not everyone's going to go to YouTube and watch talks like this. Some people are just struggling to get by. They had none of those opportunities. But you know what? They get a nice warm meal in the mosque every so often, and they feel really happy and welcome. So zakat and all of the Sharia is the widest net. You're all welcome, you're all meaningful, and the community wants you here and will look after you. So this, what I'm going to simply call preservation of faith and dignity of faith, is something that the tax system doesn't do. And that goes into, we can call the philosophy of the nation state, which is almost atomizing people and giving them a simple note of belonging to state. And people aren't atoms. Family is a unit and faith is a unit. And increasingly in difficult times, faith always shines. That's what's so interesting. Nation state is strong. Faith is all suppressed. Nation state is falling apart. Churches and mosques, hey presto, we were always here looking after communities. Faith will always shine in times like the times that we're heading towards, and certainly are in already.
Jazakallah khair, Sheikh. And I'll make an observation, but before I do that, for those who are tuned in, feel free to ask any questions as you go along. We will pick up on those questions both as we go along, but also once we've wrapped up towards the end of the session as well. Um, so Sheikh Sohail, when you were talking, I was thinking around, you know, looking at what the rulings of zakat themselves are,
Mm,
and the very specific categories that we have for the recipients of zakat, and trying to derive lessons from there as well
mm,
as to the purpose for zakat. Um, and I guess if you look through, and it's a very kind of eclectic mix
mm-hmm.
of recipients, some of which are arguably pretty broad as well. Um, you've got the the usual suspects, the fuqara and masakin, and then we get into the more
No one is usual after those two, by the way.
yeah uh,
Even them, what do they mean that's different from the others? Ongoing debates. Only fuqara is straightforward. Then you enter into all kinds of interesting discussions.
So looking through that, I'm sure you have reflected far more on it. Um, but to me, it feels like, this is almost like the pots of money that you would put aside for, like a, a, a movement, a, political movement, or like a kind of group of people who both want to support those inside, but also want to be able to invite more in to that community. It's kind of it's a lot of the money is kind of at the edges of that community. Those who are kind of perhaps leaving that community,
Hmm.
recently joined, those who want to like come into that community, those who've been enslaved or like imprisoned outside of that community, trying to bring them back in. So I'd love to get your
Mm.
sense of how best we should think about knitting it all together. Is it like a almost like a political kind of entity?
What's fascinating is one always reflects, based on the question. Because the question today was about inequality, and I'm going to take it to social inequality right now. These 8 categories, when you look at it from the lens of our discussion today, yeah, it's a wonderful collection of people who might often be forgotten. Because if you're told, take care of the needy, all of our imagination necessarily goes to a particular kind of profile that we're happy with. This person is needy. They'll be on the streets, would have a cardboard box, wouldn't really have a home, this and that. We'll have our own imagination. It would be very obvious to us what we mean by someone who's needy. And there'd be a whole host of people who are set back financially we'd never think of. So even if you just look at them right now, I'm going to call it the Hanafi frame, like the old poor people, poor mujahids and poor everybody poor for now. Why list all of them? It's exactly in this framing of inequality. Because if you think about it, look at the traveler, the Ibn Sabil. First of all, when you call it traveler, when we think of travelers, the guy who's off on Bali for his honeymoon. That's not really what we're talking about when we talk about traveler, right? Is the idea is, I often just call it the refugee, as just an idea, or the alien. The point is, it's someone who's not from your neighborhood. They alighted yesterday. Who's going to ask about the stranger? If there's no, again, moral guidance, moral, economic, religious guidance, which is what the zakat is laying the foundation of, that you should care for the stranger. You should really especially think of this category because you, the people, are very likely and minded to forget them. Uh, this is where inequality comes. If you look at refugees, people coming on asylum, uh, if one of them shows up in a mosque, we wouldn't recognize them, wouldn't ask about them, wouldn't think about them. So Christ, hang on. You know each other, but what about the stranger? And you'll find in the Bible, you'll find in the Quran, the care for the stranger as the mark of Iman. So so Ibn Sabil is just the stranger, actually. He's not from here. And you wouldn't think of him because he's not from here. Look at the slave. The slave is someone, again, obviously it's hard for us to imagine this form of being in the world, a human being as property, but try your best to imagine. He's somebody off in the home of some rich person. He gets his meals and clothing and does some work, basically. When I'm thinking about helping people, I wouldn't think about this person who's off in someone's house. Someone else says we could call it like an employee in a loose terms. I wouldn't think of this person. I think of my imagination of the poor person. I don't see this slave. He's not in front of my face. So the Quran is saying, hang on, they're in your community. And these are people, you could radically transform them. Don't forget them. You go to the person in debt. How many people, you think they're well-to-do, and they're in so much fear from debt. And I don't mean these odd long-term debts we all forced into in the debt economy of 20-year mortgage and 5-year BMW and all that stuff. I mean, you're literally in debt, and people at any moment could come asking for it. The debt that creates real anxiety.
I didn't have you down as a BMW man, Sheikh.
Yeah, well. So back to the topic. I drive my mum's BMW. So back to the topic. The debt creates anxiety, and you might not know that. You might not think of that person as a poor person. And this person, at any moment, he's scared of people. Maybe he's trying to pretend he's not around. He doesn't go to, it creates genuine fear, real debt. And in the Islamic sacred law, there's no notion of fixed term debt, meaning however much me and you made a promise, I'll pay you back 10 years later. If you're in hard times, you can come at any moment and ask your money back. And if I'm not giving it to you, you can take me to court. So any debt can actually be due. So debt is a burden. It's a real burden. It's a cause of anxiety. We might not think of those people. He has a job. He has a house. He doesn't look like a poor person to me. And I don't know the kind of fear, anguish, instability, anxiety the person is going through. So can you see this, what you're calling an eclectic group? Even if we think of them all as types of poor person, they're types of poor person we wouldn't think of when you think of fuqara. They're in our community. And so in that interpretation, what is the zakat telling us to do is don't leave people behind, which is exactly the other angle of inequality, people being left behind. And zakat is creating this understanding everybody in your community has to be thought about. They might not be permanent residents. They might not be free men in a society of such thought, but they're all one. So I just from that angle is what comes to me from your question. If we continue just a little bit more, sorry, you've got
Yeah.
the two people left, isn't it? The two people that I'm avoiding. You have your fi sabilillah people, who in the most classical interpretation, it was from the times before there was a standing army, and so it's voluntary people who've gone to defend the land. And they've run out of funding. And so again, you wouldn't always think about these people as poor because they've taken on a good cause, and that good cause has left them stranded. And you could say, well, why did you take on the good cause? You could have carried on working on your farm. Like, why did you want to leave your farm and go on that campaign to defend the lands in northern Central Asia? It's your fault. And the Quran is saying, hang on, it's not your problem why he left his land. The person has gone on the good cause, and the person is stranded right now. Think about that person.
Interesting.
Anyway,
And
that's just an angle coming from the topic that we're discussing today.
yeah, and so looking through the list, Sheikh, so there's not. I mean, because you're right, it's not just the poor that could be recipients here, right?
It
Like,
depends now, right? It's now we're entering legal interpretation.
all right, I'd love to hear your thoughts. It's like Mu'allafat al-Qulub, for example. That's an interesting one, isn't it? Because
Fabulous one.
there was a lot of the Ta'lif al-Qulub and the booty that was given, and I don't even know if the rulings of zakat are applicable there. After the conquest of Makkah, in particular, were given to some of the, let's say, the wealthier people within the Quraysh. Was that zakat, or like how do we think about that?
Okay. So, do you know, I wrote an article on this, a joint academic article, and then I removed my name from the authorship because I was about to start NZF, and I didn't want people to think I'm going to be creative with their money. So I thought, let me just keep it safe. And I was no longer the public author of that article. What we tried to do in that article was just explore what Mu'allafat Qulub might look like in today's world. So people who don't know, it's one of the, you could say, contentious topics of these 8 categories mentioned in Surah Tawbah, Surah 9, verse 60. Those whose hearts are to be reconciled. What I did in that article was a very brief survey of the schools of law. And this topic has a number of interpretations. Many scholars interpreted it only politically. meaning for them, which is what your example is. It means zakat is given on behalf of the community by some representative leader for strategic alliances. That's all. It could be with other entities who are hostile or friendly. It's strategic alliances for the advantage of the community. You could call it soft power. For this interpretation, which is very common, it's the Hanafi interpretation purely, it's the Hanbali interpretation purely. It was the early Maliki, and it's also a continuous Shafi'i one as well. It's a political form of spending by a representative leader for the advantage of the community to form strategic alliances. And so what would that look like today? And so we just had a thought exploration in this article. The other one, which is an individual spend, which you can find in the Shafi'i and Maliki schools, which is to help an individual find salvation. There they debated into two types. Some scholars, like the Shafi'i, said he must be a Muslim or she, meaning it's a new convert who's come to Islam and now feels alienated, either from the belief or from the community. Because imagine conversion is very difficult. Your parents don't recognize you, your wife left you, and maybe your job. It's a very difficult social movement. And so to prevent that person from going back and to making them feel welcome, then they have a duty of care from the community. So it's a sort of expenditure to make them feel welcome. That's a sort of one individual interpretation, salvific. And the other interpretation, the Maliki scholars, some of them have, which is for the non-Muslim who's close to Islam, and it's to encourage them making this movement. I can see it's all forms of soft encouragement, whether it's political, strategic, or whether it's individual. That's all right. That's why in our framing, it all looks odd, the whole topic, because it's all form of soft encouragement to have a tie and to find belonging. Where did we come from into this topic? What was the key question now?
We were thinking about the purpose for zakat and trying to figure out, yeah, maqasid.
Yeah, so in this topic, when you look at the political, Al-Imam al-Sarakhsi, may Allah be pleased with him, the Hanafi scholar, he says, so why is the zakat being used for these political alliances? Essentially to defend the community. And he said, this is the poor's share of jihad. This is how he explains it. Because this money we've amassed is the property of the poor. They can't go out and fight. I mean, they don't have horses and armor and swords, and they can't do all of that. So their share of the communal duty to defend the community is that a part of their money is used to defend the community. That's how Sarakhsi does it. It's their money and it's their share in communal support. When you look at the individual interpretation, then you will go into supporting notions that I've said earlier, right? Where it is ultimately going to be about strengthening the meaning of belonging to this community. When I tell someone who's hungry, I'm giving you zakat because you're my brother in faith, he'll say, Alhamdulillah, I'm so glad. I thank the best because we get messages at NZF where people write and say, may Allah reward you, may Allah bless you, because they see this as a religious exchange. Because they see this as it's the religion and the religious tie that helped them. And so it is a faith exchange, and they feel it and they express it even today, even if they get help from someone they haven't met face to face. So that just gets extended. That same idea, that same purpose gets extended to someone who's on the border, new in, about to come in, but scared, to say, listen, we're here for you. Here's some money. Here's some clothes. You're struggling with your rent. Hey, don't worry. We'll pay your rent. Come. It's okay. We will welcome you. You will be safe here. It's the same idea then, widening the net of the meaningfulness of belonging to this community. So that salvific one is quite straightforward. And the political one, we've made an attempt at if you want to explore that further. But it's
Fascinating. Well, Sheikh, we should also talk a little bit about calculations very shortly. But before I do, I'm almost like now tempted, the course of the next 6-7 years, with the annual IFG Zakat stuff that we do, to just target like the overlooked recipients of Zakat, and
that's very important.
just go for that, because we don't in the I guess the mood music, so to speak, or the mood nasheed of our community. we don't really ever talk about the kind of recipients that we're talking about here today.
Mm-hmm.
They're kind of, they're overlooked, uh, and and I think because of social media and the way that the digital age kind of homogenizes messages, it's kind of it makes it even harder for the real essence of zakat to kind of come through, because zakat is actually about the anomalies.
I think that's absolutely and that's my interpretation of the Hanafi reading of these 8 categories, because they are eclectic, if you like, and they're all considered, according to the Hanafi scholars, all types of poor people, other than the zakat collector. The other 7 are all types of poor people. So why talk about 7 types of poor people? It's exactly this. It's this burden of zakat administrators to find people who would be left behind, who are struggling because of financial need. And so I agree with you 100% that it's the same challenge when we talk about international relief, right? Everyone is moved to give to the causes that are on the news. And we forget all 99 other causes because they're not on the news. And so even if we were to talk about UK zakat, I agree with you 100%. If we just focus on an area or a sphere of concern, who are the people being left behind? There might be all kinds of sections of society who are in, we can come up with a sort of measure, right? Anxiety, difficulty, stress, struggle for financial reasons, and no one is noticing their need. It hasn't yet hit the media circus or the
Mm.
social media circus. That would be one of the most powerful, impactful, proper ijtihad of zakat administration. And I would fully support, encourage, and partner with you.
Let's do
Godwin, I
it.
think it's absolutely correct.
You heard it here first, guys. Next we need to figure out. So like, we'll start from the end one maybe. Wabin is Sabil. That's like refugees, surely, asylum seekers and
It
refugees in the
is.
UK.
But the interesting thing there is, but by the grace of Allah, it's all over the news. That's like in the recent months, it's been the most
Yeah, that's
fundamental news topic. And the way it's working is these asylum seekers, many of them, maybe a majority, are coming from Muslim countries, and the Muslim community is stepping up to help them. Like there's a partner in Bradford work with Bradford Foundation Trust. They're specializing because what happens is these asylum seekers get shipped off to hotels in poorer, cheaper areas, which often is where Muslims live. It's poorer, cheaper areas. So Bradford is a center where a lot of them get sent,
right.
and government gives very basic support, like no cash, one room, food the kids don't like to eat, etc. So they go to community for help. And originally, like I said, faith always shines, right? So originally it was church communities were the most outgoing in welcoming and supporting. And there were, there's still many stories of, again, Muslims converting to Christianity through care in church communities in the UK and Bradford through partners we've met, and overseas. Because that's what faith charity is about. It's about coming to community. It's not about just having some money. And so that's why, our partner, Bradford Foundation Trust, as an example, was set up to create a Muslim faith hub for support of the asylum community. East London Mosque, I met their director just a few months ago. There's another asylum hotel down the road. So now they actually come to the mosque for help, and they've started a service. So our faith centers are standing up, but they're not always equipped. They always have knowledge, and they're trying to very quickly find a way. So the asylum community, in my imagination, is a community that is on the radar. They are coming to mosques. They're on the news. I think we need to educate the community that this is Ibn Sabil. You can't ignore them. And if
Mm-hmm.
you don't welcome them, another community will, but then you've let your own community down. So in messaging, I think we need to educate hard. This much is true.
There's some questions coming in, which I'll come to as well in a second. Let me trailer something just to kind of drop a grenade and then walk off. So the year after, Sheikh, what we could do is go after footballers who've, kind of express some sort of warmth towards Islam, and
Mhm.
that's all we do for our zakat that year. We just go.
That's where it gets so slippery, you see, because this idea, because that's what we explored in this paper. I have to find the link. I wrote it with Muhammad Abdul Aziz.
Right.
It's called Zakat. I have to remember the title.
All right. You
Engaging
can pick it up
politics.
and
It is
put
the
it in the
title.
comments.
Engaging politics with zakat. So I did the fiqh part, And then he did the part of, we discussed everything together though, what it might look like in a minority setting, influence. But the problem with influence is this influencing the influencers traditionally always had a representative body, like the Muslim ruler. How meaningful is it if I go to Boris Johnson, hey, this is my £200 zakat, just put in a good word? It's like meaningless. So who's the representative body? Unless you can figure out what is a representative body, you can't do influential. This you can't relive this idea. If you were to spend community money on fast cars for football players, where's the science? Where's the representation? How is this a legitimate activity? It might feel nice. So the scaffolding is quite a lot that you have to go through to actually have a theory for this.
Very interesting. Maybe we'll have to establish like a well, let's not go there. So
UK Caliph, is that where we're going? I'm happy to vote for you.
Right? That's effectively what we'd have to do.
To vote for you.
Well, do we even need a vote? Perhaps all we need is like a few BJJ, gyms behind us, and that's that's all we need. So, Sheikh, before we we completely descend into I don't know where we've ended up. We've ended up in a BJJ gym at the moment. How does a practical person, you've got some Ali B, or there's another user, Abu Uthman, or Ibrahim Khan, whoever, they're sat down, they're like, okay, right, how do we calculate our zakat? In 2-3 minutes flat, I want you to give like the volumes of study that you've done in 3 minutes. How do we calculate zakat?
After the 3 minutes, I want to ask you a question. Okay, because it's about a philosophy about the kind of wealth. But I'm going to do what you said, and I'm going to come back and
all right, let's do it.
What I'm saying. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Let's go. So zakat is due only on particular forms of wealth. These forms of wealth, as far as we're concerned, are the forms of wealth that are money-like in their nature. And that's the topic I want to explore with you. What's the best language here? It's your money, your gold, your silver, your trade stock. Only 4 things you have to pay zakat on. These are the 4 things that are money-like in our economy. Money, gold, silver. Trade stock is anything you bought to sell. Anything you bought to sell is liquid for you. And so these 4 types, gold and silver, there's a debate on jewelry we can talk about later, but any item of gold, silver, money, trade stock, you add it up on a date. And that's why the date is the only most difficult thing in this topic. There's a particular date in the year, you add all of this up and you take away from it money you owe other people on that date, which could be in form of invoices or fees or fines or debts. If it's a debt, you can subtract any debt that is already due and what you'll be paying off in this next zakat year. So you add up on that date your money plus your gold plus your silver plus your trade stock, the value of things you bought to sell. What I mean by trade stock, subtract on that date what you owe other people, including debts that you'll be paying back up to that year. You're left with a final number. If it's above a nisab value, another thing for us to debate afterwards, if it's up to a nisab value, a minimum in the sacred law, let's just call it £400 for now, then you pay 2.5% of that final number. The other things you pay zakat on are assets that contain these 4. I'll give you 3 more assets and then we're done, 7 in total. When it comes to shares, if you bought shares to sell them, they're just another kind of trade stock. If you bought shares not to sell them, then you owe zakat on the proportion of shares that corresponds to money, gold, silver, trade stock. So every company will have some money, gold, silver, trade stock. The proportion of the company that is zakatable assets, you pay zakat on that proportion of your shares. Pension schemes, these are defined contribution pension schemes. The proportion of the schemes that are invested in zakatable assets, just like with the shares you pay a zakat on. Cryptocurrencies, which is just money really, in another form. There's only 7 things, but there's 4 which are money-like, and these 3 because they contain those 4. That's why there's only 7 assets you have to worry about when you do a zakat calculation. The trickiest thing is the date. The date is meant to be the last time in adulthood you became rich according to the zakat. The last time in adulthood you crossed that boundary of the nisab and became a zakat payer. On the lunar calendar you note the date, and that's your date for the rest of your life unless you're below the nisab on that calendar. If you don't know the date, try best to estimate it. If you can't estimate it, then you can choose one. And that's the date on which you calculate. There's nothing else left.
Fantastic. Alhamdulillah. That's
nothing left.
What's that? Sorry.
Yeah, carry on. I'm just thinking. Carry on.
Yeah, yeah. So what I was going to say was that this is the reason why I like NZF so much, mashallah, that you're like you're like an iceberg where the tip of the iceberg is what we've just heard in 3 minutes, which is the practical bit, and just getting people into it. But underneath the iceberg, there's like 9/10 of the other stuff that we were discussing, the deep thought and the philosophy and the strategy and like what we can and can't do, and all of that comes together as the practical stuff. So jazakallah khair for that. You were going to ask me a question, I think.
Yeah, two questions now. We've got nisab
Oh,
and we've
right,
got
okay.
money like. So there's two things, right? So now a bit of philosophy talk, and I want you to guide me in language, brothers. I'm always confused about the right language here. So what kind of wealth is zakat paid on? Zakat is definitely not a wealth tax, because what we said earlier, it's not coming after rich people for being rich. And zakat is not an income tax, because even without income, you pay. So what kind of wealth is zakat on? So in the classical fiqh, this genus or type of wealth, they called it in Arabic al-mal an-nami. And what they meant was it's the kind of wealth which has growth in it. So it could be livestock or agriculture or money, three types of human economy. You're either an animal herding society, you're either an agricultural society, or you're a trade society, or a mix of the three, but there's no fourth real society in human history or economy. And in each society, every social member in a society is engaging in economic activity to achieve growth in something which is their measure of wealth. As the growth occurs, they're wealthier. Could be animals, could be farmland, could be money in a trade economy. Zakat is only on the growing assets. So we say in metaphor, paying zakat should feel like you're cutting your hair, not that you're losing your hand. Because in the cutting your hair, the hair always grows back. That's why it said, why are the rules like that? So it's not threatening. You already had 10 babies born in your flock, give one to your neighbor. You still have 9 new ones. And next season, God willing, you'll have more as well. So there's no burden. We're not coming after your house, however many houses you have. We're not coming after your cars, however many cars you have. We're not coming after your fancy Rolex watch collection, however many Rolex watches you have. It's not wealth tax. But this thing that is liquid and moving, that's the subject of your economic activity, is always in flux. God willing, in growth, it won't hurt you to give some to the poor. And then you will have more thereafter. So this wealth, so why is the rule like that? I think we can explore this in a few angles now. This wealth that has zakat on it. But one angle is just to make it easy, because the point is, it's a duty. There's no reason to run away from. It's not after equality. It's after responsibility that is not burdensome. And it can make a real change in this economy, because you're giving people that means of wealth that they can also start growing. Now, the question to you is, what's the right word for this? Because I just call it growing wealth. That's just a translation of Arabic. But what you, as the finance guru now, what's the right label to use for this kind of wealth that zakat is on?
It's an interesting one. I don't think there's like a specific word. The kind of words that come to me is, liquid or arguably fungible stuff that is the non-stationary, non kind of fossilized bit of your wealth. It's more the stuff that's still kind of the lubricant to the economy. That's the thing that Allah Subhanahu wa Taala is asking for. I think like another, and it's fascinating how you put it, because like another way of thinking about it that I've often thought about is that there is something called zakat planning, right? Where Prophet ﷺ was like, don't kind of the orphan's money. You don't want it to be just eaten away by zakat by doing nothing with it for years. Um, and and to my mind, zakat is this kind of natural stimulus within society that moves us towards productive activity as opposed to useless, frivolous stuff. And I think that there's a portion. I was thinking of the economy as a whole. There's a portion of the economy where this kind of liquidity or this kind of turnover of stuff that's such as agriculture, stock, that sort of thing is actually really productive as well. But the problem comes where in our society, the huge amounts of the financial sector have just become, this kind of liquid kind of washing machine where they're not turning over anything particularly productive. Like if you look at the futures market, or the the agriculture kind of wheat market or the oil market, 30, 40 years ago, the vast majority of it used to be because people actually needed it for hedging purposes or for actual trade. Now it's a tiny sliver, and the rest of it is just kind of a back and forth. And I think, if everyone had to pay zakat, I actually don't think that would happen, because it wouldn't be, you suddenly lop off 2.5% of that every time. And so, um, I'm not saying that this is like, I think this is like an alternative way of, or like a complementary way of thinking about, what does zakat actually go after and the kind of effects it has.
There's so many angles here. So one was ease on the payer, so it facilitates, and the other one is, you're absolutely right. What is the consequence of all of this? Is that this liquid asset, which we've said is the zakat is on, if it's lying around, give it to the poor. If it's not lying around, you do something. So either way, why is it lying around? Why on earth is money lying around? And as soon as you put it to use, someone's benefiting, because you either invest it. The only way to save money from zakat is to put it into the real economy. And we put it into the real economy and generating jobs, generating products, generating opportunities, and they will pay zakat. Community is benefiting. So that's why there's no such thing as actual, as long as you're doing responsible zakat management, there's no sin or blame in this. To say, oh, my zakat is coming, I don't want to pay so much zakat, let me put it into a form of asset class. There's no blame in this, because every asset class is actually benefiting people, because it's the real economy. And if you're not putting into the real economy, then definitely let the poor have it. And so either way, you're benefiting people directly or indirectly, helping the poor, helping society. And so it is about moving, benefiting, and developing society. There's no doubt about it. That's I think the insight of this, the liquidity focus of the zakat. What's blameworthy is tricks to avoid zakat. This is not a trick. This is investing. A trick to avoid zakat is the famous one is to gift your wife all of your money the day before your date. Your date comes, I'm poor. You say, honey, can I have my money back, please? And then you get the money back the next day and you've skipped zakat. That's just a trick. There's no investing there. That's sinful, blameworthy, destructive. So for someone to do a trick to avoid zakat.
That would work in my household, I can tell you.
Exactly. I think hadiths are quite clever. But the well, what am I going to say? But just investing to minimize the zakat burden, there's nothing wrong with that. And it is benefiting the economy. It is benefiting this vision of moving wealth. And it will always reach the poor in an Islamic economy. The poor will always be beneficiaries of growth, because in the Islamic imagination, the poor are at the top and they're not at the bottom of an economic theory. I gave a talk on this yesterday, by the way, in Cambridge Central Mosque. It will be online tomorrow, God willing.
Excellent.
On Islam and the moral economy.
Excellent. I'll check it out.
It will tie to this, inshallah.
Some quick fire questions, Sheikh, because I know that we're coming up to the hour, and I've been very.
Can you answer the 401k account question?
I've not seen that one yet. We'll get to that. Question: can you give zakat to poor elderly auntie back home that has no income but has some village land that isn't worth much?
So the way that the zakat recipients work, and certainly I'll talk on the behalf of the Hanafi school, as follows. What makes a person a zakat recipient is that their surplus assets minus their debts takes them below a nisab. So if auntie has land which is not required for living or agriculture or something, it's just land, it's just property, it's not an item of utility for her, and the value of this land takes her above the nisab, auntie is meant to actually be selling the land because she is rich. So it's not that. So the way that certainly the Hanafi scholars look at it is that it's not just the world has two people, zakat payers, zakat recipients. There's people in the middle. People in the middle are those who own illiquid assets, which are surplus. They don't pay zakat because they're not liquid, but they don't take because they have surplus assets. I've inherited an art collection. It's worth millions. I don't want to sell it because it was... Oh, no. Sorry. E.g., I have...
Oh, I see.
Yeah, exactly. Inherited an art collection worth millions. And I don't want to sell it because it was my uncle's. But why should I take community money to support me? That's the only thing you have to worry about in the case of this auntie.
Another question. So, Sayyid Arafat Qureshi is asking, if I go to Islamic Relief, for example, I need to specify it's for zakat. I think the answer to that is because zakat has got very specific parameters of usage, right? So otherwise they wouldn't know.
Yeah, just to help them fulfill the trust for you.
There's a LinkedIn user. There's a huge need for NZF to have women's support programs. Trust and Foundation focused on gendered poverty. A Muslim faith hub for women would be good.
It's really interesting because my impression is, although we'll have to check, is that women form probably the largest single group of NZF's recipients. I'll have to check the latest data. But certainly when we were mining the data, around the period of, after last Ramadan, the various gendered mechanics, the highest growing segment was actually women it was around 35, 40, this age group. NZF started actually driven by stories of women victims of domestic violence. So in terms of a gender balance, imbalance, I'd say women are fairly prominent in the recipients of NZF support. And it's like NZF started with 3 dedicated women shelters, actually, as well.
Where were they?
Oh, that's a good question. My guess is London, Birmingham, and one more, which I'm not sure where. Because we discontinued them, I think, in about 2016, so that they ran for about 5 years.
Right. So Quokam Damba is asking, Salam, in Lebanon there's an economic crisis and our money is locked in the bank. Interesting. Bank run. Do we have to pay zakat on that money?
Wow.
So it's as you probably know, Dr. Sohail, so the money in the bank is a loan effectively given to the bank, and now the bank has basically gone bust because they've overspent. So that is technically money that you may not necessarily expect debts that you would expect to get paid back.
It's really interesting. Remember we talked about our 4 zakatable assets that transformed into 7. So the first one was money. Zakat on money. You owe money, zakat on money that is owed to you. Either it's a loan you're expecting to be paid back, or it's a sale from a transaction, from a trade. It's your money. It's owed to you. Now, in this situation, if money is owed to you, but it's not in your hand right now, you either pay zakat on it now anyway, or you can wait to receive it. And once you receive it, you can backtrack missed zakat payments on it. So in a case like this, there's 2 answers now. One answer is obviously don't pay zakat on it until you get it. Once you get it, then you can backtrack on it. That's the basic answer, unless you want to pay zakat on it now, which is an option. The other thing is, if you have reason to believe that this money will not come back to you right now, the bank crashes, the bank is written off, the money will not come back, then you've lost the money. If you've lost the money, then it's no longer yours and there's no zakat liability on it. You want to add anything on this, Sheikh Ibrahim?
Not really, no. I think that's a good way of thinking about it. I was also thinking as a slightly abstract question around our economic system as a whole, and how banks use like £1 to create £90, £100 using fractional reserve banking and the money multiplier effect, and how zakat would be impacted by that. I've not really come to any like firm conclusions, but I think that I don't know. I've not like done the the technical kind of steps, but my gut would be that banks somehow either avoid having to pay zakat, or yeah yeah. I think I need to do the analysis there, but I think that's an interesting line of analysis.
Sorry,
For
does the bank pay zakat? Sorry, what's the conclusion of your question?
I think the results would be either the bank pays a load of zakat, far more than it ever takes in loans, because it's created new money,
Oh, right.
um,
Okay. Yeah, correct.
or the bank pays no zakat because the obligations it has, um, liquid obligations it has, always are more than the debts. I need to like kind of think it through, but I think the punchline there is that
Mm.
I suspect that this is a critique of the banking system. Like,
It
why?
is.
Yeah.
It extends to, by the way, contentious topic. It's a very minority topic. Is there zakat on money? Because there are segments of our community, that they say there's no zakat on money because this money is nothing. It's just a promissory note. It's of no
Mm,
consequence. It's not an actual asset class. And so there's a theoretical argument here, which would be good in the line you're thinking, just to explore and tackle it head on.
mm,
Whereas in fiqh, the reason why it's such a minority position is that this money is obviously of some consequence. We are acting economically from this money.
yeah, yeah,
How can we say that this thing has no burden of responsibility on us to those who don't have it?
yeah,
If we zoom out, the answer is really straightforward. It's like quantum physics. So when you zoom in, there
yeah,
are questions here, like what is this money?
yeah,
And
yeah,
how does
yeah,
it tie to the classical notion of wealth? And so what you're hinting at, I think it's good to tackle head on, I
all that,
think, in a
yeah.
formal way.
Interesting. Uh, Ali B, it would be great if IFG or Curate have a paid service where you can calculate your zakat, obviously for more complicated or complex situations. So I think there's a link in the comments where you can actually book in for a one-on-one consultation with NZF to do precisely this, right?
Yep, just go to the link. You get just it's free. There's no cost. You just book a slot with a mufti and talk through your personal situation.
Fantastic. All right, let's have a look. Any other
And
questions?
just do it now, because in Ramadan, obviously, we're more manned, so that the slots go quicker. It's a quick turnaround. So just go now. Just book a slot and speak to a mufti.
Um, Brilliant. Dear Brave is a name. Nice name. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Can we deduct the installments paid on mortgage for a year? Is that deemed as debts?
Really good question. I'll say what I know, and Sheikh Ibrahim will add what he knows, and I'll ask him for this. So there's an oddity, right? So like I hinted at earlier, in the classical sort of conception of debts in the Islamic law, all debts were in principle due. At any moment, you could be sent to court, however much you promised on paper. Debt was always a burden, and it always needs to be considered. In our time, we live in the debt economy. We are in debt bondage. That's just the name of the game. And so you are encouraged to do long-term loans to secure basic rights like shelter in a two-bedroom place somewhere so you can live. And the bondage is constructed in such a way that you're fined to try and get out of the bondage quickly, and you're protected. The bank will never come after you. So there's no anxiety that I have to somehow pay 25 years of debts next month. The system is such designed. That's why contemporary scholars, you wouldn't find any major contemporary scholar, well, we'll have to do the survey, I guess, saying you subtract the entire mortgage because of the nature of this arrangement, and because it's only the well-to-do that have mortgages. It's a complete inversion if you were to do that. But then how much can you subtract as a debt? Some would say what is due today, which would be this month's installment. Some would say what I hinted at earlier, which is a middle solution, which is what you plan to pay back in this zakat year, because then you have the money for that. Um, that's all I will say. So it's between the immediate to the 12 months. You wouldn't find full year. And what was new to me, which was interesting to me, like some scholars like the Shafi'i school, they don't actually subtract debts at all, as far as I understand now, meaning subtract nothing. I know that was the position actually of Iqbal Naseem, previous CEO, which was you subtract debts like mortgages only if they affect only if paying the zakat will actually affect your ability to pay the back mortgage, which practically speaking doesn't happen as well. So here you have a spectrum now. Subtract nothing because realistically, it's not really going to affect your paying back the mortgage. It's not like you have one lump sum money that's going to go down and that's the end of the story. And that's a very practical,
Mm,
pragmatic answer. That's definitely was Iqbal's preferred answer. You can say do the immediate, which is what is due this month, that is due right now, or you can go up to the 12 months. So that's why the language we use in NZF is can subtract up to 12 months and leave it to people, because people want to pay zakat, and they get really frustrated when they say, I'm earning a good salary, but when I subtract my 12 months mortgage, I don't pay zakat anymore. And that's a burden for people. I want to pay zakat. So that's why the best language is can subtract up to, and then let people find themselves in that spectrum. What do you advise, Sheikh Ibrahim, on this?
yeah, no, I agree completely. And I'm still thinking along the lines of the banks, because the banks issue the student finance the banks issue those mortgages, um, and uh, and if we kind of get wiped out by not saying that we're never going to pay zakat on it, and for them this is effectively like a um, you know they technically should pay zakat on it. It's kind of like thinking along those lines. Does it actually end up ever getting paid if we both kind of shift the blame? um, One other observation here is Islamic mortgages, because here the idea is that you actually are part owner in the house as well.
Mm-hmm.
There, you know, some scholars give the kind of distinction that you should only really deduct the rental payments for, let's say, that month, or the month after, because that's like effectively just your usual rent payments that you need to
Mm-hmm.
make, and then the rest of it you don't deduct, because it's not really a debt in the classic sense of the word.
Yeah,
You're just
sure,
buying
sure.
out the other
Mm.
entity.
Mm.
Um,
It's how it's structured as well, you see. I think some of them are structured that like you have a burden to pay more.
yeah,
Some, like the primary finance model, is clearly cooperative house ownership. So I think it
yeah,
depends on the nature of the relationship as well.
agreed. Um, So I have a 401k account which the company provides a part of my work benefit. Is there a zakat on that amount in the fund? So this is effectively the same as Moina's question, which is, do I have to pay zakat on my pension? I think there's like a huge range of opinions on this. I'll give my thoughts, and then I'd love to get
Hmm.
your perspective
Hmm.
on it as well, Dr. Sohail. So like I think some people say that it ultimately comes down to like how much control you have over those assets, and how much are they yours, from a legal and kind of custody perspective today. And My understanding is that the prevalent view is that you should pay zakat on your defined contribution pension, i.e. pensions where the money is quite clearly, um, you know uh, it's quite clear that this is the investments that have been made, and they're kind of being held for you on trust effectively. And A lot of the investments within a pension would be to do with stocks and shares and funds, and so all the usual rulings would apply, as they would if you were to just hold them directly. And then for defined benefit pensions, where they're effectively a final salary pension, where it's like a deferred salary that you get in one lump sum at the end of your year, at the end of your tenure, and you retire. My understanding is that scholars say that effectively that's like that's like a salary. So once you get it in your hand, then you pay that one time, and then you're done with it. But love to hear your
On
thoughts as
the
well.
on sorry, in the last part was on the defined benefit or defined contribution.
Defined benefit.
Yeah, yeah. So I guess within myself, I'm still pondering on it. What would be the best way to deal with this fully? What we advise at NZF, and certainly it is sensible, but it also feels strange to people, which is why I think there's still a pondering and I think a deeper exploration that can happen, which is simply to say the following, which are simple facts, which is exactly what you've said. In defined contribution, it's your investment, you opted into it, you're paying into it, the pot's in your name, no one else owns it but you. How can you own wealth and not have a liability on it or a responsibility for it? It's like a long-term savings account. If I lock my money in a savings account, how can I say, oh, it's not my money anymore? You chose it, you're growing your pot this way. There has to be a responsibility in it. It's very hard to say no responsibility. That's point number one. Point number two, as you've correctly said, always goes back to the fact that zakat is on what's liquid, and in short, it's your money, gold, silver, trade stock. So it's only the proportion of this pension investments that corresponds to these liquid assets, which is typically not going to be more than 10%, 20%, 15%, depending on what kind of pension scheme it is. So it's not all of the pension pot. The only thing that I think could be explored further in terms of the investigation is, what do you subtract? Meaning, because if you were to take the money out today, there'd be a large fine. If you were to pay in lump sum in the future, there'd be a tax. So, like, is it the full number, or can you subtract a thing? Then what do you subtract? I don't think I've heard a clear answer on that. So that's just something I think can still be explored, I feel, which would account for the fact that it's absent as well. And there's a burden today, but I don't have an answer for that. But in terms of what is very clear, you are a wealth owner. you have assets, you chose to lock it away because you thought it was better for you to grow your wealth in this way, and some of it is represented by liquid assets. How can you not have a zakat burden on that? So I think that answer is clear. There's minutia. I'd be interested again. Maybe there's ways to explore that further. But that baseline is clear, and people have to at least operate on the level of that baseline.
Makes sense. Let's do two more questions, and then I guess we can wrap up. One is Tariq bin Zaid is asking, what's the situation with compensation settlement? So I guess this would be where someone has been, I don't know, a victim of some kind of, I don't know, negligence, professional, clinical negligence or something, and then it's got a lump sum amount in cash for that. Now, my kind of hot take on that would be that's just cash that you've received, and so it just would form part of your usual zakat calculations. But I'd
Just
love to hear your
make
thoughts.
the court date after your zakat date has passed if you want to have
And then invest it
maximum
all.
management of that settlement. Yeah, it's like a gift that's come from your uncle.
Yeah.
Whatever is in liquid form on the day of your zakat date, then you have to pay zakat on it.
Ahsan asks, do we, and then let's perhaps make this the final question, do we need to pay an extra 25% to charities that use 25% of the
Oh
Zakat
my
Foundation for
goodness.
administrative purposes?
Yeah. This is the. What do you say on this? You, as the innocent third-party observer of the charity sector, what would you advise people?
Absolutely not. I think you should just treat it as like in the modern context in the West. Who are the Amalina Alayha, who are sorting out the zakat for us. Either no one's doing it, which is like an odd situation because then how is all this zakat getting distributed, or this is just not applicable in our day and age, which again seems like an odd conclusion, or it's the charities. To me, it seems like a bit of a no-brainer.
Yeah, no, this is very good. I think all I'll say from my point of view now, as the non-third party, is that the way we've structured it at NZF is to cater to the community wherever they stand on this question. So there'll be some people in our community. The reason why there's a debate on this, you really go back, because it's in the Quran, right? The zakat workers deserve a wage from the zakat. Why is there a debate on this at all? It's because some people would argue the person who should determine the work and the wage is the Muslim government, and we don't have a Muslim government. Obviously, the reply would be, which Muslim government are you going to trust with money management So I think we've got Muslim government, issues in many countries in the Muslim world right now. But that's the way the argument comes.
But I
The
feel,
people,
Sheikh, that's like a bit of a
yeah,
cop out, isn't it? Because
correct.
like throughout time, apart from like let's say the first, I don't know, 50 years or like X number of years, not even 50 years, maybe 25 years or so, there was like an unambiguous, like uncontested, Islamic Khalifa, right? Great. After that, we've always had like multiple kind of, governments. Some, and I'm sure in those countries there will be like the skeptics who say, "Are these guys that they're really Islamic? He drinks, he does this, that, and the other.
Mhm.
They're Shia or they're Sunni or they're whatever." And I feel like today is pretty much like sure there's like a slightly difference in that there's no actual Khalifa that is around today as like a symbolic thing, but if you kind of push that argument, you kind of end up in the same position as we broadly are today.
True, but if we just to call it Muslim government for now,
Yeah.
the idea is we have Muslim governments. It's governmental. It's not private. The idea is you're not determining the
Yeah.
policy. There's some governmental determination. But the counter argument to that, obviously, well, not obviously, but the counter argument is the levels and standards of transparency to be a charity that's registered and audited and publicly available. That's fairly transparent,
Hmm.
probably much more so than in
Then
an
before.
equivalent setting, right? So
Yeah. And like,
is
what is the government
transparency
anyway?
the objective, right? That's one thing. So that's where that argument comes from, this whole debate. It's in that actually it's a governmental political debate. It's not actually a charity debate.
Yeah.
And the way that we do it at NZF, so if you believe it's fine, obviously, so then what we do is we have a 10% from the zakat that goes just towards the cost of the distribution, the team, the technology, the payment, etc. It's not going to marketing ever or anything else within our costs. But also, for those who believe it shouldn't be used like that, we, because at NZF, unlike maybe other charities, we're not looking for poor people to give you a zakat. We already have them lined up. They're already applying it. There's no moment where NZF hasn't got people lined up saying, here's my request. I'm asking you to give me zakat, and the zakat you're collecting from me, use it as you see fit. So we have a contract with recipients. We already are representing the poor, which is the theory of Muslim government. That's a topic for another podcast, I think. The
Yeah, absolutely.
governmental theory of zakat. So we, the way that we're structured, we already represent the poor. That's our contractual relationship with them. And so in our contract with them, they've allowed us to utilize the zakat in their interests according to policy. So it's called an agency contract. So if you don't believe you can take it because of the Quran, then we take it because we are agents of the poor. That's how you pay a landlord instead of a poor person, etc. And if you don't want to do that, we also say you can offset this 10% at point. We will always give the option of that. So if you believe it, you can pay it. If you believe we can take it as amils, you can give us 10%. If you believe we can take it as agents of the poor, which is acceptable to those who don't believe we're amils. So we're covered on both sides, really. You can give it to us. If you still don't feel like you want to, here's how you can offset it as well. So we believe we've covered every segment of the community argument, because we can be set up like that, which as someone on the inside is very important to me, because when you're on the inside, it's not an intellectual question. It's about a service to a community that should feel comfortable transacting with you. It's
Yeah,
not about arguing with people. It's about saying, where are you at? How can we meet you and be a service that is good for us to collaborate in?
yeah.
Which is why I'm very keen. We always cover all the dots. Wherever people are coming from, they should feel comfortable.
Yeah, I agree with you, Dr. Sohail. As a third party, though, I'd say to everyone um, to go for the option where you do treat NZF as the Armeline, and you give a portion to that, because I just think it's strategically. I know you guys have to cater for the broad spectrum of views and make sure everyone's comfortable, but to people who are not comfortable, I would say to you that this, if we continue down this line, that's just not sustainable, and it's very difficult for charities, especially charities like NZF, which deals purely in zakat, to attract any donations other than zakat. And so the question arises then: how on earth is NZF supposed to, finance itself? And so I think that's really important. But yeah, a question, a time,
Let's
debate
jump
for another
into
day.
that. We have to finish the sentence that you've started. So at NZF, we fundraise for what we've called sadaqah, which we explicitly state is enabling us to help more people.
Mm,
That's enabling us to invest in our technology, so we help more recipients and help them better. Enables us to invest in our outreach, so we can reach more zakat payers and educate them. And we demonstrate that if you spend £1 on this growth fund, we can generate 6 times more zakat on that. So certainly, we would appreciate people investing in the project, and you can see how to do that from our website as well, because it is needed.
brilliant. Dr. Sohail, it has been truly a pleasure as always. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put barakah in our Ramadans, and also the work of NZF, for now and for the future as well. And folks, if you would like to calculate your zakat, pay your zakat, ask any questions, get a one-on-one session booked in, the links are in the chat below or to the side of your screen. So make sure you check those out. And once again, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.